Okay, let's get started. Thanks so much for joining us today. On behalf of our faculty director, Professor Tariq Masood, I'd like to thank you for joining us for this event with the Middle East Initiative at Harvard Kennedy School. We are delighted to be hosting this conversation between James Snyder, MEI Senior Fellow, Executive Chair of the Jerusalem Foundation, and Director Emeritus of the Israel Museum, and Aline Khoury, Managing Director of Dar Yusuf Nesri Jasser for Art and Research in Bethlehem. Before I hand the program over to James, please be aware that this event is being recorded. All attendees, including journalists, are prohibited from recording or distributing content from this program in any way without prior written authorization. Time permitting, we will take questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, please send it to me, Mary Fulham, using the Zoom chat function. James?
Mary, thank you. And as always, it's a pleasure to be all together, this time from Jerusalem. So I'm saying good evening from here and good afternoon to those of you who are in Cambridge and elsewhere in America. I have to say that being in Jerusalem makes this a perfect venue for this conversation about emerging Palestinian art, a conversation that I hope will extend our ongoing series of talks looking at the Middle East from many social and cultural perspectives, and of course, continuing to stretch the syllabus of the Kennedy School well beyond politics and public policy. Today, I'm really pleased to be talking with Aline Khoury, who is Jerusalem born and educated, who is committing herself to a mission exactly to the point of our discussion today. In full disclosure, before we begin, I have to say that Aline's and my own lives have intersected for more than 20 years. Aline and her brothers went to the Anglican International School together with our kids, Lily and Daniel, so we've known her for a very long time. And it actually makes me very proud to have a conversation of this level of sophistication with her. Just to begin with context, first I want to start with my own experience and perspective from here in Jerusalem from 1997 when I arrived to become director of the Israel Museum. And at that period of time, in the museum, there was a kind of thrilling collaboration that was ongoing between us with artists who were local artists from the Arab and Israeli communities, with artists from Jordan and Egypt, and with local Arab community artists working with us and emerging Israeli artists at the same time. This was a kind of ongoing series at the Israel Museum, and it was actually exactly about creating a platform for engaging Israeli and Arab creative practitioners together. We showcase artists like Khalil Rabah, who would go on to have a very strong international presence, continuing to have that presence. And that kind of programming really was a springboard for international engagement from this part of the world to the rest of the world. Then the second Intifada overtook us, and really it closed that door. And this brings us to today's conversation. And I want to fast forward to our conversation for today. Our questions really are about what can become the best platform for launching Palestinian art today? And secondly, how can Israel be a part of that picture? What we want to do in our conversation now is to benefit from Aline's experience and from her perspective, which is very firsthand on the ground here. Just as a word of background, Aline's family, I want to speak about them for a moment. Her parents are descended from the lineage of Greek Orthodox Arab community members from the Galilee in and around Nazareth. Aline, as I mentioned, was born and raised here in Jerusalem. She studied as a young student at the Anglican International School, which was a mix of local Christian and Muslim Arab communities, Christian mission community members from around the world, and a small number of international students like our own kids, Lily and Daniel. Most students from the Anglican school went off to Europe or to the US for their university careers. Aline decided to stay here. She studied at Hebrew University and had, I'm proud to say, a distinguished academic career in art history and social anthropology, particularly focusing on art history. After that, she did go off to Goldsmiths College at the University of London for a master's degree in visual culture. Each of those degrees she received with honors, and she came back. And often this is not what happens. Students leave this part of the world, there's a brain drain, they go elsewhere, they perform brilliantly, but they don't bring that talent here. Aline came back and we're proud of her for that. And Aline, I really want to start our conversation now by asking you, what brought you back and what gave you this sense of commitment to being here?
Thank you so much, James, for that warm and generous introduction, and also for inviting me to be part of this conversation and be able to share our stories and our overlaps and experiences together over the years with such an amazing group of people. You asked me about why I returned, but really I wasn't gone for too long. It was just about 10 or 11 months in my master's in London. And it was like literally ended. I had a student visa that ended the day after I submitted my thesis. So I didn't even have a chance to enjoy a month or a couple of weeks after my master's. But my commitment was really goes back to when I finished high school. And I was questioning what I should be doing, where I should be going. And I chose to stay when all my classmates were leaving at that point. Until today, none of those classmates, neither Palestinian or international, returned for over a year or two to work or in any way other than visiting their families and friends. And I used to see my brother, who's 6 years older, when he used to return, each year his friends and circles were getting narrower and smaller to merely family and relatives. And I found that very, very disturbing or saddening. I really felt like I wanted to always have a community here that I can come back to, regardless when and where I'll be in the future, and to have some sort of rootedness and a sense of belonging here. There was also something about being in an international school during the Intifada that created a safe haven, which was nice, but at the same time, it was also a bit of a bubble, and we were always safeguarded. We didn't go out so much, so I didn't know the city. And I wanted to discover it more. So I chose to stay from my early university years, and I was more curious and interested to meet people my age in the city, whether it was Palestinian or Israeli. And my experiences at Hebrew University, although it was a very interesting and much different from anywhere else in the world if I had gone, it did open my eyes to the realities on the ground, and I felt more of a commitment to stay here and to make a difference. More so when I went to London, I knew that I had a limited time there as a student due to visas and so on. I could have gone on to do a PhD or studies to find any way to sort of stay abroad, but I wasn't interested in academia, and I didn't want to go away from a practice that's on the ground with people, and in particular community. I really enjoy, like, through some experiences that we'll talk about now, I feel more comfortable and reaffirmed with that sort of decision because there's so many amazing artists and creatives on the ground that really needed some sort of support systems around them. So it was a choice, and I was very conscious of it.
You know, Aline, actually, it's interesting hearing you say this, knowing you all of these years, because your connection here very much is about how an understanding of the culture of the place can be a way to embrace and interpret the complexity that is here and not just write it off and not turn away from it. And it's funny listening to you talk about being at the Anglican School and Hebrew University. For those of you who are not here often and are not familiar with these places, these are both powerful places in the landscape here. The Anglican School is a kind of small sheltered setting. but it very powerfully connects you to the history of the modern period of Jerusalem. And of course, Hebrew University sits up on a hill and looks over the narrative of the long history of the city and its old city and the new city. And Aline, for you to have been so attentive to embracing and being embraced by that landscape is actually something that's quite special. Once you return, your career took you almost immediately to what our subject is, to focusing on how to treat and address and broadcast the story of emerging contemporary art here. Your first career years were at the Al-Mamal Foundation for Contemporary Art, which sits just near the New Gate in the Old City in East Jerusalem. And it really is about looking at and creating a Palestinian identity through the visual arts anchored by the Old City. And it is a venue that's committed to showcasing emerging Palestinian artists, also to hosting traveling exhibitions and residencies, and to bringing that outside influence of art and culture from elsewhere together with the emerging art and culture from the place itself, deeply rooted to the Old City. Talk to us about your experience there, and actually tell us a bit about Al-Mamal.
Yes, definitely. Before I share some slides and images, just to give you a little bit of a feeling of the space that Al-Mamal is, when I came back, it was in 2014 in the fall, and it was a very turbulent time in Jerusalem. There were several street attacks, car rammings, and there was the Gaza war at that time. So I came back to although it was just under a year from leaving the Jerusalem, I came back to a completely different city that was very controlled and militarized. There was police and soldiers everywhere. It wasn't an easy time for me to come back at that moment in particular. But at the same time, I didn't want to just sit at home and like apply to jobs. And like most postgraduates in art history, there's not always that many options available right away. So I actually went to Al-Mamal to volunteer. I knew that there was a few exhibitions coming up and there was a Biennale that was happening. So I volunteered for 6 months and slowly climbed my way up when Al-Mamal itself was in a difficult financial crisis, and also the conditions that we were living in Jerusalem, and particularly the Old City, was not easy. I'm going to share some images just to have a bit of an idea. So Al-Mamal in Arabic means a factory. And it was named after this tile factory inside the Old City walls that was there from the early 1900s and had a long legacy of creating tiles, the very decorative, ornamental, colorful tiles. It was active from 1998, mainly in exhibitions, residencies, focusing primarily on visual arts, as James explained. And they only were able to renovate the tile factory itself, the building that we see right now, in 2012, and they moved in 2013. So when I joined, they were still recently in the new space, hitting a financial crisis because many foundations, like development foundations and funders, were actually leaving Palestine or their funds in the region because of anti-terrorism clauses and fears of being active with not just cultural centers, but civil society organizations. So when I started volunteering, and also when I was taken on, I was not really offered very much compensation for the work that we were providing. So we were all really there volunteering for a very long time. And because we all believe that this space can provide something to the city. As an arts organization over its 15 years before I joined, they were really creating exchanges for Palestinian artists, whether one, providing opportunities for exhibitions for artists to have their first exhibition displayed and be recognized by an organization, acknowledged for their talent and creativity in their works. So many artists exhibited over those 15 plus years, had their first exhibitions there. And then after that, through either their masters or going on exchanges abroad, they were able to exhibit further onwards, like internationally. So it played an important role in the lives of Palestinian artists because they had those opportunities, at least to exhibit and work. In addition, Al-Ma'mal has an international residency, which started from the 90s, hosting international artists so that they can introduce arts to Palestinian artists. So they can be in more conversation, be exposed to arts with, you know, different perspectives, mediums. That arts can provide so much different knowledges and histories and narratives. So it was important that to have that international aspect from the very beginning to create a dialogue and exchanges with the local artists. There weren't many, if none, international spaces for international arts. Very few would cross over to the western side of the city, like the Israel Museum, to see modern art. Otherwise, they were just experiencing it through internet for now, or books and television, I guess, or postcards and so on. But otherwise, to actually experience arts firsthand was not something that was that accessible. So having physically an artist present in the residency, meeting artists, creating works specifically for Jerusalem and the place was extremely important. I'm just gonna, oops. So this is one of, I'm just showing a few images of the space inside. It's not really a gallery space. They had to work around the building because inside the old city, there's all these little niches and buildings built over each other. So it's not a white cube. It's not a traditional gallery space. And we always had to adapt it to the actual physical site. When I was there, it was really difficult to really do programs. We would do exhibitions and people would come to the opening, but to have audiences or communities really engage with the space throughout the week or the year or the period of the exhibition was much more difficult because of accessibility to the old city. You really have to make an effort to go there. There isn't that much public transportations, or you have to walk up depending which part of the city you're coming to. So my contribution wasn't too much in the exhibitions, although I supported, of course, the productions and the residencies and everything else. But for me, it was really important to create a community that was comfortable enough to come to the old city and to enjoy each other's companies and to create a social space. In the 2000s, after the Intifada, there was a big decline in the cultural and social life. Very few bars and cafes exist in the eastern part of the city. So there were no social spaces. So my idea was really to work with the space and opening it up more to the community to use. And in that sense, one day I was really alone in the gallery space, and these young high schoolers entered, and they were like in awe about this beautiful site and space. And they asked me, they were curious and asked me about the space. And then they just said, oh, we have this little band of ours and we wanted to perform. And they're high schoolers. So we always had established or emerging artists that have, you know, at least a BA or some sort of recognition of their practice. And here comes high schoolers that want the space to just perform music. So I talked with the team, and then we thought together that, you know, it might be a good idea to also open up the space, not just to visual artists, but to creatives working across different fields to exhibit their work. And at a time when we thought there were very few artists in the city, in Jerusalem, we did an open mic night. And on the first night we've ever done this sort of a program, we had at least, oops, not here. We had at least 15 shows on the stage for at least 5 or 10 minutes. There were artists just coming out, whether reading poetry, singing, performing, even doing certain dances. And that was just a moment that was silly to say, but it was a bit of a revealing moment that we realized that there was so much talent, and all they simply needed was a space and someone to hear them, listen to them, and give them that sort of platform. So for the next 2-3 years that I was there, we really focused on building partnerships with schools, with organizations, with music academies, also with individuals that could come and use this space and really showcase their arts, again, across all sorts of fields. These were the very first students, by the way, that came to me. And what I did was I actually gave them the stage in full. I let one of them host the evening. He continued in drama and theater, so he had this sort of personality to host. And then the guitarist actually became a band member for 2 and 3 other well-known music bands in the city. So people started coming to Al Ma'amal just to pick up young artists, which was amazing because it became a meeting point for so many creatives so that they can connect and network and meet. And of course, there was always the social aspect, which we added a bar to the space. And then we invited independent chefs and cooks to present food because we didn't really have an active kitchen or restaurant. And then it sort of complete the circle. The old city used to always be a ghost town. This is just another image from those open mic performances. But the old city used to be like a ghost town. And those evenings that we started opening on Fridays, the restaurants on the streets kept open with us, and it created this sort of dynamics on the street all the way from Newgate until Al Ma'amal. It was lit up, there was activity, there was movement. And that was very beautiful, that the small space in the corner between the stone walls and pathways was able to create that movements and dynamics.
You know, Aline, I've so much to say before you move beyond this. I want, first of all, when I described at the beginning about the fluid engagement that we had when the Israel Museum could be a kind of platform for emerging Israeli and Palestinian artists to meet one another, to know one another, and really to be launched in the rest of the world. This was before the time of the Second Intifada, just as you described. And then the Second Intifada closed that door. And interestingly, at the same moment that Al Ma'amal was getting established in the old city in West Jerusalem, in an old Ottoman palace, an organization called Hamifal, which is factory in Hebrew, was beginning to do exactly there what Aline is talking about. And the idea was that you would emerge from the rootedness of the place. In the case of Al Ma'amal, it was actually about emerging from the old city and having these creative practitioners be inspired by where they are and do creative practice, whether they were visual artists or performative artists or any other kind of artist. And Aline, exactly what you said about bringing students and having them see this was a kind of pathway for giving them the opportunity of aspirational models in creative practitioners who were grown-ups, so that they could look at them and think, gee, I could do that as well in a not so logical place in the world, in a very conflicted moment, to be able to turn their attention to looking at the potential for growing up into a world of creative practice. And Al Ma'amal was doing this in the old city for the Palestinian community, and in West Jerusalem, it was happening at the same time. And I don't want to anticipate, because we're going to come back to this, but surely there needs to be a way to complete this circle and get those two agendas back together. But that'll be later in the conversation for just now. And before, Aline, before we move to Dar Jasir, which is where you went after you left Al Ma'amal, I want to ask you, as you left, why did you leave? What did you see as the success there, or the limitation of what could happen there that gave you a reason to move on?
Well, there were various factors. I mean, I felt like I already created a really strong platform over those 5 years that I was at Al Ma'amal. Al Ma'amal we stopped reaching out to people. Artists were coming to us, flooding us. So it was really, for me, that was a really successful and like a feeling of satisfaction that I was able to provide that to Al Ma'amal and to the city. Like there was not really a need for me to do that outreach anymore. It had already put on the precedent, and it was known. We had a good team, we had all the facilities, but I did feel like I needed a bit of a resting time, because holding these events and creating that dynamics was actually extremely exhausting on a physical, mental level. And I wanted to go back to the art making, because in Jerusalem it wasn't so, at least for Al-Ma'mal, for our in that specific time, and the need for funding as well. We were really struggling with funding. One thing that I didn't say was that these public programs were completely self-sustainable. We started introducing tickets at the door, the barbers providing income. So we did not need any grants or funding for these projects. All individuals came and they were fine with whatever we were able to give them from the income that we were generating on those events. But for us to work with artists, to commission them for new works and be involved on a longer process, you know, art making is a process, and it takes time. You build relationships with the artists. And if it's a community work, you have to really work sensitively with the community. So I felt like I want to slow down a bit and look more at the process. And then work with the artists themselves. So at that time, I actually wasn't intending to take on another position, but I was assisting various artists in their productions. So like films or sculptural work, but really spending time on an intimate level, like conversational, informal settings with artists, to really understand the worlds that enable them to create, or maybe the limitations that don't allow them to create because of lack of funding or resources or networks and so on. I was also teaching at this time as well, some art students. I was teaching art history. So I was also seeing how the limitations in the educational system and the need for infrastructure to support artists in their early career. And then Emily Jasser from Dar Jasser in Bethlehem, she reached out because she needed support in an exhibition, and she was secretly trying to poach me for more, for a larger position in that sense. But we entered into a conversation, and I felt like our visions were aligned in that sense, working more closely with artists in the community. And at the same time,
Alina,
I mean, yeah.
No, Alina, before you start to talk about the Jasser Center, I want to make a little introduction. It's so fascinating to listen to you articulate what you just said, because for me, as I understood it, you wanted to go from presenting to making, and to be involved in the process, not of presenting, for the valuable purpose of providing an aspirational model, to supporting the making, and to move also from the sort of rootedness of the old city away. You went to Bethlehem, and as you're going to describe, the Jasser Center is about an artist-led enterprise. And it's also about bringing artists who can demonstrate the way that you can use creative expression to explore the challenges of place and time. You left the old city, you went to Bethlehem. The organization serves its community, but it does it in a way as a kind of model for elsewhere. And now I do want you to talk about that shift, both from sort of being involved with presenting to being involved with the making part, and also from leaving the sort of centrality of the old city and going to Bethlehem.
Yeah, one thing just to give some context is that Bethlehem has always been, up until the 2000s, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and it's just 10 kilometers away from the city center to Bethlehem. So it was always had a really strong relationship to Jerusalem. And going to like, I have many friends in Bethlehem that are originally Jerusalemites, but they can't come to Jerusalem because of permits and their ID, and then there's the separation wall. So Bethlehem, although it's that close, it's also got a completely different circumstances and situation that we needed to take into consideration. And for me to navigate at least 3 or 4 days to Bethlehem, whether through routes and checkpoints and so on a daily basis, I'm actually shifting my conditions, or my environment, because of these 2 different places, because I live in Jerusalem and I go and commute to Bethlehem for work. But this was also really important for me to think back about pre-Intifada and the pre-wall and separations, what these two cities had in common in the relationship. Dar Jasser is a home that was built in 1890, and it's on the Jerusalem-Hebron road, and it was one of the first homes built on that road. So it is a historic heritage site, and it links the two sites, the two cities. And outside, unfortunately, I don't have a picture, but there's also a stone fountain outside that was a sabil for pilgrims that used to come and make a stopover on their way to Bethlehem, you know, on their pilgrimage route. So there is that connection between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, which is really strong, although the current conditions are very much different. The house itself today is a few meters away from a watchtower and a separation wall. Behind us, exactly behind that building, is a hotel. The hotel is behind us, that building that you see, but this building. But here on the left, on the right, is a refugee camp, and right across from us on the street is another refugee camp. So it's not a place for really an art gallery of any sort, but the family opened their family home to create a space for artists, or a hub for artists to come, and creatives, youth, to create a space for them to express themselves, to learn, to exchange, amidst all of this unusual setting and quite a turbulent setting as well. Dar Jasser, we call, as James said, is that we're an artist-led space. So when Emily reached out to me, we were really thinking of different models for an organization. We try not to call ourselves an organization, but a space or a home where artists can come and create their own programs. So there isn't one curator, there isn't one artist, there's several artists. Some are more permanently in the core team, others come in and out. The artists that run the programs are not all in Palestine or in Bethlehem. Some are coming from Chile, a place where historically Bethlehemites have been in a relationship with Latin America pre-1948. People from Europe, from all over the world that can come back to Bethlehem. The space inside is a residency, so we invite artists to come and stay. We focus less on exhibition making and showcasing art and more about working directly with the community and allowing artists to convene, to get to know each other, to study, to read. And here outside, there's two terraces that were, the house wasn't lived in for several years. So the first workshops really had to clear the lands, bring in soil, build up the terraces from scratch, and grow things. So this was part of an urban farm workshop where youth from the refugee camps around us came, and over 6 to 7 months they were planting and growing various vegetations and plants and so on. Other workshops, just to give an example of our work, Michael Rakovich, an Iraqi-American artist, did a workshop with, it's not youth, it's actually artists in their early careers from all over the region, so meaning Haifa, the north of Palestine, the West Bank, Ramallah, Bethlehem, Jerusalem. Sadly, Gazan artists aren't able to come to Bethlehem or to leave Gaza, so we try to bring artists together from different parts, Palestinian artists from different parts of the region that can access Bethlehem together. Here they were together reading and preparing for the workshop. Part of the workshop was also walking around the city. So our projects aren't merely just, again, not everything's exhibition making, but it's also experiencing things together. So walking as a practice is also something, like experiencing certain situations together as a group and talking about it openly and critically is part of it. In addition to cooking and eating in these informal spaces. I'll show one or two more projects from our work. This was a project by Vivian Sansour. She's actually right now a fellow at Harvard. I don't know which department, but she's there.
And we're going to talk more about her a bit later.
Ah, okay, great. Well, here she is. We do cross paths. So Vivian is the founder of the Palestine Heirloom Seed Library. And she was invited for a residency in Dar Jasser for around 6 months to work on the land. She went through a similar process because she was one of the first residents where she had to clear out the whole land from shrapnels and stones, and actually bringing in the soil and building up the beds. And she was thinking about the relationship between heritage and the land. And she wanted what she called to create a biodiverse demonstration on the land. So here she brought in seeds from mlokhiyeh. It's mallow that we use it's a Palestinian dish that we use that's known in Palestine and every home. It's like a stew dish. So she grows the mlokhiyeh and then also zinnias that were passed down from her mentors. So also thinking about how seeds travel over time and places. And then the end product was, not the end product, but the end process from this planting was a workshop where different people came together and they harvested, they collected the mlokhiyeh, they removed the leaves from the stems. So they spent time together and they discussed and they shared stories. Like they were prompted by Vivian to share stories of home and belonging through this process, like while they were actually removing the leaves of the mlokhiyeh. And then it ended with a workshop. She cooked the mlokhiyeh, the mallow, and they all ate together. So, I mean, it's these processes, experiences, meeting points that are very, very intimate, and people are all engaged in it, and you get to meet people, you get to learn things, and actually embody it, not just witnessing it or as a spectacle. So here we see so much in our projects where a year later, some of these artists or participants are crossing paths and doing projects on their own or collaborating. So you can see the impact of the work, maybe not right away, but these relationships and the bonds that are built in these moments together are much more long lasting. So that I feel is really beautiful.
Aline, do you feel, at Mamal, it really was about inspiring students to see work and to feel that they might aspire to be a creative practitioner. Do you feel here where it's about making and you're more in a community setting, do you have that same sense that this provides a benefit for students to understand that they can grow to be creative makers?
Definitely. And if anything, most of the participants and artists, they keep returning to a certain point that a few of them, not just one, a few of them came to us to propose for themselves to create workshops so that they can help others in the community or present their own practices around the context that we're in. So it is very much a cycle. It's not something it's a longer term relationship. It's like any relationship, you have to remain in contact to create a space of trust and a safe space for communication. So in that sense, it really, I keep saying the word intimate, but it really is about building these relationships, and it's not like a one-time event. It's continuous, and it grows with time and evolves.
Well,
It's
what you're saying.
Though. Yeah, sorry, but Al-Ma'mad, we're also returning.
What you're saying just now is exactly to the point of how grassroots enterprise can be meaningful in a way that an institutional one isn't. And I want to shift now. You haven't been involved professionally in the Palestinian Museum in Birzeit, but I want you to show it and to talk a bit about how it was created several years ago and how it is exactly about trying to create an institutional presence, a little bit top down rather than a grassroots presence bottom up, which is what you've already described in Mamal and in Dar Jasser.
Yeah, the Palestine Museum, or the Palestinian Museum, is an interesting project, and I think everyone had their own imagination of what this place should be or could be. To come and make such a statement or to make such a building and project that is national in its essence, for such a fragmented people, because Palestinians are dispersed all around the world. Some can access, some cannot access the land. So The Palestine Museum, if I'm not mistaken, opened in 2014 or 2015. I can't remember when exactly,
15.
but 15, yeah, I thought so. There was all these questions around, will it have a permanent collection? What will it exhibit? What will it represent? And it was the vision for the museum started, I think, in the 90s, early 90s, by much of the diaspora community or Palestinian refugees in exile that wanted to create something in Palestine or in the Palestinian territories that could speak about and commemorate the Nakba, the events of 1948. There were, of course, many different ideas for where the museum could go. And one of the most memorable events is its actual opening, where the space opened with empty walls, with no works inside or artifacts and so on. And it was a bit of like an anticlimax, or like, you know, after all of these years you're waiting to see. But at the same time, it actually put the Palestinian art scene a little bit more on the map in an institutional, or as it's a mega institution. It's not like these grassroots organizations, but when you say you have a museum that's backed by so many funders and has the resources to create, it puts Palestine and the museum and the artists at an equal level as many other museums worldwide. And the empty walls that I mentioned, I mean, it was also a point for us to really think about, us Palestinian artists and managers and organizers in the country, to think of the possibilities of such a space. And I think it's slowly evolving to think about what is the role of an institution or a museum, and what does it represent in that sense? Does it hold a collection, or is it something that changes over time? They've done, for now, the last 3 or 4 exhibitions that they've done have been looking at Palestinian arts and culture over the years through different prisms, whether it was the landscapes through paintings and new mediums, at the embroidery history of the Palestinian culture. I think now is looking at the coastal cities of Palestine. Yeah, and it's really put Palestinian art on the map, but it is a mega institution, so it does still do works and exhibitions in a traditional way, but they're very much aware of that. Funny enough, the directors on our board, so we always have a partner. We find the museum as a partner who always supports us, actually, in our programs, not financially, but in outreach and visibility. I think having these these partnerships and communications with the people on the ground, whether it's a museum or another institution of that caliber, is extremely important.
Aline, do you feel that it's having an impact so far, or do you feel that it's sort of growing in an institutional way and connecting to organizations like yours, so that they're still building the foundation?
I feel like they're still building the foundations. It needs time for a museum of this sort to grow, or to have a larger impact. One thing that is very interesting that the museum is doing is focusing a lot on their educational program. And that is really, really a successful program that they've done. With every exhibition, they have not just a public program, but children's and school activities. They regularly host tours. And their proximity to Birzeit University is just right behind this building on the right side. Also, they're very much involved with education. And I think maybe less so internationally, but locally they are having an impact on arts and education.
It's really fascinating to hear this. That I want to say 2 things first and then come to this point. When you look at this, those of you who know the Israel Museum, there is this resonance with the idea of a kind of modern or contemporary vision of an architecture that bursts out of the landscape in the context of a garden setting that establishes it where it is, which really resonates between here and, for those of you who know it, the Israel Museum. And, you know, in 2015, when the Palestinian Museum opened and couldn't bring the exhibition that it wanted, we made an effort to help them to create an exhibition with Palestinian material in the holdings of the Israel Museum. And it wanted to happen, but there wasn't a framework for it to happen. But everything that Aline is saying just now about the focus on education as you start a national museum like this is exactly what the motivation for creating the Israel Museum was when it started 55 years ago. It's interesting to think of that. And it really brings us to the point of today's conversation, which is really the evolving story of Palestinian art as a form of contemporary identity, as a way to engage with and define a contemporary identity. You know, Aline and I have discussed that there was a kind of first generation of what we would now call Palestinian art and Palestinian artists that began in the early 20th century, shifted at the end of the 1990s with the Second Intifada, and that was a kind of foundation for what you can fast forward to today's generation. And as we close, I want to talk a bit, Aline, about platforms today for giving an international presence to contemporary Palestinian artists. You and I identified two interesting examples. One was Larissa Sansor in the Danish Pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2019, which was a really stunning work. It was in the Danish Pavilion, but it really gave presence to her and her work. And the second is a show that's going to open actually next year at MoMA with Ruan Aburam and Basil Abbas. And I want you to talk about those two because they really are examples of success stories launching Palestinian artists with that identity really squarely in the international landscape.
Well, both the artists are coming from different places and circumstances, I think. But they were both, I think, born and raised in Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and Ramallah, respectively. And I think each of them actually, where they got to where they are now is because one, grassroots organizations like Al-Ma'mal actually gave Rawan and Basil their first exhibition. They were working in a new visual identity and medium, bringing sound, image in an abstract way that not everyone in Palestine at least was able to recognize or appreciate. And then slowly they really built themselves up on their own, going through education, going through residencies, applying, presenting, and being very persistent about their work to be able to reach where they are now. But along their way, there were some organizations that really supported them. Can't remember which year, but they won the Abraj prize where they had a $100,000 grant to do a massive commissioned work. And that really opened up their career in a significant way. Abraj prize is in Dubai, just to give a context. So they were able to launch not just regionally in Palestine, but also in the Middle East. And then through that, they continued their practices and currently live in New York. They currently exhibit all over the world, and having their current exhibition coming up in MoMA is really a very achievement moment for both of them, but also for the Palestinian art scene. We see many artists, the younger generation artists, although they're not that old, they're in their late 30s, but their visual language has really impacted so many artists, not just in Palestine, but in the Middle East. So we see many people working in a similar way as them. Larissa Sansur, on the other hand, I think she studied in Denmark and continued to London and the UK. And through her relationships there, she was able to build a network. I personally haven't seen too much of her work in Palestine. It has been exhibited, but I don't think her infrastructure or support system was coming from here. It was mainly coming from abroad. But putting such artists on an international map through recognized institutions at least recognizes their talent, their skill, their stories, their narratives. And that's extremely important to keep Palestine and the identity and our histories and narratives alive. One thing I want to just say is that actually in vitro, Larissa Sansur's work is now on Netflix as part of their recent launch of 32 Palestinian Stories film. So everyone can actually now watch it and access it.
So would you would you say that it was through their own initiative, their own effort, their own ambition that they were able to move ahead? Do you think there wasn't really a springboard that launched them
Mhm.
into the international art scene as Palestinian figures? And then the question is, can there be such a springboard? And one of the last questions I want us to discuss is, do you think there's a way for Israel to be part of that platform for those artists? And I'm asking this because of a couple of examples with which I'm very familiar just in recent time, and I want to describe them before you respond. One is the story of Haifa. Haifa in the 20th century was a kind of gateway for immigrants to come here. And in a way, modern art in Israel percolated first in Haifa because artists arrived from Europe. They were there, they integrated with the local Arab community, and you had this kind of amazing exchange of creative practitioners there in the north of the country. And just in this year, some of you may know that at the Haifa Museum, there's an exhibition celebrating 70 years of the Haifa Museum. And it's called Haifa Way, and it's exactly a presentation of these 70 years of a kind of integration of creative practitioners coming from Europe, from the West, and meeting a community in the North that was pretty predominantly Arab and where there was creative practice and they engaged together. And it suggests that it might be a segue to a moment today where that same thing can happen. And the second example I want to give is here in Jerusalem, where there's an enterprise called Mekudeshet, which presents itself exactly as a platform in Jerusalem for engaging with Israeli and Palestinian visual and performing artists in efforts of collaboration creatively that are meant to dissolve a barrier between them. Actually, we have an image which I want everyone to look at, which is the location of where Mekudeshet performs all of these extraordinary enterprises. There it is. And it's exactly, those of you who know me know that I speak about the power of place. And this is exactly at the place where the Palestinian community of Abu Tor, which is on the right, Silwan, which is on the right, and the Israeli community of Abu Tor, which is on the left, meet. And it's a kind of seamless border. And if you look up in between, you see the Dome of the Rock over the old city of Jerusalem. There's such a powerful meaning to that setting. And this is where Mekudeshet is able to bring together Israeli and Palestinian artists who are visual or performative in the work that they do. And it really is having a kind of synergistic and energetic response here. And I'm wondering, in raising this question about if and how Israel might become a platform for bringing together and then for enabling Palestinian artists to go out into the world, I'm just wondering what your thought is about Haifa, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv. Are there ways to be able to do this here?
Sorry, yeah, I had myself muted because of my cough. Well, you had several questions in there, but firstly, just to address Rawan and Basil, Larissa, and other artists from that circle, I guess, or that generation. If you speak with all, I've got relationships with some of them, and all of them say how hard it was to really, it was purely from self-initiative, going around to galleries, talking to people, applying to grants, getting rejected from grants, and so on. It's really a hard place for artists to make their way, especially if there isn't a support network or organizations or foundations for them to really grow. So all of them, actually, I could really say that they've made it to where they are now from self-initiative. And of course, other organizations that help them, or curators along the way, or foundations and funders, but it wasn't all necessarily from Palestine or Israel at all. In that sense, their success is purely on their personal talent and initiative. When we talk about Haifa Way, unfortunately, I didn't get to see the exhibition, and I was I read a little bit online, And one comment or one phrase that stayed with me was from an interview with the curator, Kobi Ben Mair. And he said that through the exhibition, he was trying to make right the wrong in the museum's history. Because the museum, that exhibition was showing 70 years of arts from the collection and then other works from loan. And sadly, although the exhibition does show several Palestinian artists and artworks, very, very few of them are actually from the museum's collection. So although you bring the exhibition as a good example, unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of the state of Israel, but rather I believe that individuals are going to be leading the way and not necessarily institutions, because the institution here, Haifa Museum, actually did very poorly in, in that over the 70 years, but we had individuals that had a vision and were critical and were brave enough to go in out of their way to make that right from the wrong of the history. Similarly, Mekudeshet, there, I mean, it's not actually similar, it's very different, because Mekudeshet is working very closely with the community in a very careful and subtle way. They're extremely sensitive to the location because this location has various levels and histories in front of us. Although it's beautiful and has people coming from different places, those communities are also under threat, whether house demolitions or being displaced from their homes. Silwan has this archaeological park coming up. So they are in a sensitive place, and what they're doing through their work is bringing people together. Although it's through arts and culture for a specific moment or period of time in this beautiful park, in this beautiful setting, they're putting the seeds in for something different that's coming later on. I think we still have a way to go for Israel to lead the way, but I think there are many individuals that are seeing a different way to live together or to provide opportunities for each other and support each other in that sense.
You know, Aline, it's a very good point, because you're saying that it might be that it is individuals who will be the springboard. Collectively, individuals can be the springboard. And having seen a few times Haifa Way and having talked to Kobi Ben Mair, for example, I know that being new to the Haifa Museum, his objective exactly is to return to that first moment of inspiration where there was integration between the arriving immigrants and the Arab community that was there. And same with Mekudeshet, it's really individuals and their aspirational vision that might make it possible for those initiatives to give an opportunity to bring together an Israeli and a Palestinian creative community. You know, I want to turn for a moment before we close, I want to turn to the economic dimension of all of this. You know, in this past period of the Abraham Accords, and we've seen a way that there is now international access via the Arabian Gulf for the Palestinian community here to do economic development, cultural engagement, and is it possible that can also be a path to a kind of platform just for the commercial success of artists who are coming from here? You know, this week happens to be the Abu Dhabi Art Fair, and it's interesting to watch how that's unfolding during this week. And I wonder if there might be, this is not a personal initiative, as we were just describing as personal springboards that can be helpful here, but rather a much broader agenda and an opportunity that might be available.
I mean, it's interesting because like Abu Dhabi or Dubai art fairs have been ongoing for several years, and Palestinian artists have participated. Regardless of the restrictions on certain borders, art is able to move and travel in different ways without the physical artist being present. So although these economic deals, like Abraham Accords, I don't really see it as a peace accord and more something more on an economic and military basis, but in that sense, artists have always had a relationship with the Gulf or in the Middle East in general. I don't see that this particular event or relation will change that. Artists have like even Rawan and Basil, who we brought as an example, have already been to Dubai and participated in the art fairs and received awards and so on long before that. I think what it might do here is create a pathway more for Israeli artists or maybe Palestinians in Israel, living in Israel, to travel there and be more present physically. But more than that, I don't see it as changing the conditions right now for those artists.
I think I might actually agree with you, and it takes us back to our core point, which is that culture and creative practice can be a pathway for understanding, a pathway for interpreting, and for embracing by looking at challenges through creative practice. And I think a lot of what you have done here and what you are doing now really speaks to that same point. And I want to be mindful of time because we're supposed to close after an hour. And I do just want to close by saying that really your commitment to investing your time and your energy and your professional expertise based in Jerusalem to work on this complex subject here and out in the world is something that's quite important. And it delivers a message which I think is really quite strong. And you know, I hadn't thought of it before, but this point that the platform might be based on individual initiative, it really suggests that you're part of that platform. And I want to thank you for having this conversation with me and with all of our guests, but I think we all want to thank you for being so committed in this way.
Thank you, James, and it's been a really great pleasure being here, and I hope to be able to meet the fellows and participants in this Zoom and another opportunity.
And we thank all of you for being with us.